The next 1,000 years is due. See, look, everybody else ran out. Moses ran out. Abraham ran out. Okay, Joseph didn't have one. This is Noah's running out. All right, well, David's runs out in 4103. Christ has to be born then to justify another 1,000 years, or else the world ends. That's why Paul writes what he does about saying Christ came in the fullness of time. In the Greek, that's a play on the Greek god Kronos. That's in Galatians 4:4. All right, Christ has to come then, because the 1,000 years lapses. Now, the next thing that's determining is David's retirement from kingship, and this ends up being Christ's death date. All right, David retired from kingship, as we saw before, in 970 BC, minus 1,000 years, that's 30 AD. All right, and if you plus 4106 to that, okay, well, that's, I did it wrong somewhere. Okay, that's 4136 here. Okay, the right hand side where the P is in kingship, this part right here, okay, that's 4136, and that's actually when Christ dies. All right, that's also the deadline for the temple, but I'll get to that in a minute. David's death is 7 years later than that. So the outer limit of time was 4143 from Adam, which is equivalent to our 37 AD. 1,000 years prior to that was David's death. See, Messiah has to rule the same 40 years that David ruled. So Messiah has to be born, has to. Otherwise 1,000 is up. He has to at least be born king here, 1,000 at the end of this 1,000 years. Okay, and he's only allotted to live as long as David did. And he's got to die successfully by the same time that David died. And that outer limit was 37 AD. That's the outer limit that's being used in Daniel 9. As you're going to see in the next series of videos I'm going to do, I'm going to show you the actual verse. I'm going to show you the Bible verses that use this accounting. You know, because I'm not making it up. I got it from the Bible verses. Okay, so just to recap, David's crowning at Jerusalem, the 1,000-year limit to that would be 4103 in the Adamic calendar, and 4 BC, late 4 BC, call it 3 BC in your calculations, for the birth of Christ. Otherwise, the time ends, because there's no new 1,000 available. Okay? David's retiring from kingship ends up determining Christ's death for different reasons we're going to cover when we see the verses. But that's actually the year Christ did die. And that was 1,000 years dated from David's retirement in 970 BC, which is equivalent to our 3136. And in this calendar here from Adam, it's 3136. Okay, 3136 plus 1,000 is 4136, and that's where the P is, right here, to depict 4136, which is the year Christ dies. Okay, the deadline, however, for his death was 7 years later, because David lived to age 77, and that's depicted here by the 1, which is equivalent to year 4143 from Adam, equivalent to our 37 AD. And you're going to see that the Isaiah 53 and Psalm 90 both reconcile to this date. So does Daniel 9. Okay, that leaves the temple time. Okay, the temple time is limited to David's retirement time. The primary reason, however, is different. Moses, we saw here, Moses 490 ran out here. And that's 3156 from Adam. The temple had to be up by then. And you're going to see that too from the Isaiah 53 and Psalm 90. They reckon everything by temple time, as far as the syllables and stuff. Because David is dead at this point, And the temple represents the promise to David, which is Christ, and that promise is recorded. It's very witty. It's in 2 Samuel 7, David's all moaning and groaning about how his house is nicer than God's house. So God replies through Nathan, "Oh, you want me to have a nice house? Okay, I don't really need a house, but I'll not only tell you the plans," which is like 50% of the Old Testament, "for this house, but I'll give you a house of sons." See, the temple always depicted the time house to depict the son's house. You have to have a house for sons to live in. If there's no house, there's no sons. Okay? There's no time, there's no sons. Okay? So the temple always depicted time. That's why time is given to the temple. Okay? So it interlaps and is totally related to David's kingship, because it's the prediction of Messiah to come. You know, remember when the Lord said, "Destroy this temple and I'll rebuild it in 3 days"? That's why he's saying that. That's why that's so witty. So the first and second temple time, okay, even if the first temple hadn't fallen, would have run from the equivalent of our 950 BC, that's when Moses 490 is up, 950 BC to 30 AD. It's the same deadline as that. Now, the net result of that is that because Israel is late in getting the temple rebuilt, and that's in Isaiah 53, we're going to go through that, there is a 7-year piece still missing, still owed her, that couldn't be paid. All right? There is also the 40 years left over from Abraham maturing early. So in future videos, we'll cover that too. But I hope that by seeing this staggering, that you see now what's the problem. There's no 1,000 years past David. This is it, baby. Time has to end with the 1,000th anniversary of his death. And that's why Christ came in the fullness of times. That's why Christ had to come at the end of. He had to be born here 1,000 years after this, and his deadline for death was the 1,000th anniversary of David's death. I hope that's clearer now, because once we get into the math and the verses in the future videos, you're going to be blown away.